Hey, again, happy Resurrection Sunday to you. Really good to be with you. Those of you here in Caledonia, can you help me one time? Just give it up for and welcome our Middleville location and those of us joining online. Good to be with you guys. So good to be with you in Middleville and those of you joining online from wherever you're at. And some of you are in places like sunny Florida. And I just want to say it's sunny here too and heading towards 65. So happy Easter. So can we all get right? So can we just enjoy that for a moment? Yes. Again, happy Resurrection Sunday to you. Really glad that you're here. Glad that we get an opportunity to be together in this. And here's what's happened so far today. We've sang about this story of the resurrection, and we've actually sang some also about the death that then led to a resurrection, right? And we've talked about it. We've already even navigated some scripture around it, just some of the sacred words of God that we find in the Bible. We just got to hear Lauren share a powerful story about the transformation that Jesus can do in a life, and that happens because of this death and this resurrection of this very real Jesus. And so already this morning, like lots of different encounters with the events of this story. I wonder if for a couple minutes we could read, but more than read, if we could listen in, or if we could almost insert ourselves into some of the events around this resurrection. If you've got a Bible, I'd love to invite you to open it to Matthew chapter 28. If you don't have a Bible and you just got a phone or something, you can literally just Google Matthew 28 and click the first link, because that's going to get you to these words from the scriptures. Matthew 28. Matthew is a letter written by a guy named Matthew, and he's writing to a group of Jewish people, trying to help them put together the life of Jesus on earth, trying to just help them understand from beginning to end the life of Jesus and what he came to do and what he came to bring. And included in this biographical account is Jesus' death and resurrection. So in Matthew 28, we're going to read some words about his resurrection. So by the time we get here, there's already been a trial of Jesus, if you could call it that. There has already been Jesus being accused of some things. There has already been a group of Jewish people threatened by Jesus, plotting this arrest and this trial of Jesus. There's already been Jesus beaten and mocked and spit on and whipped, literally having his flesh torn from his body, being ridiculed, his clothes being gambled for, being stripped down, publicly shamed and embarrassed, paraded through streets, crowded streets, carrying his own tool of death, this cross. All of that's already happened. There's already been a burial into a tomb. At this tomb, there are some Roman guards there. These Roman guards, some of the strongest people, the most well-equipped warriors, devoted to Rome and the power and the advancement of Rome, they're at this tomb. And they're at this tomb really strategically because while Roman soldiers physically crucified Jesus, it was actually Jewish people who set up the crucifixion. Jewish people, Jewish religious leaders motivated the crucifixion. Jewish religious leaders, people who went to church a lot, motivated, plotted, schemed, developed, organized the crucifixion of Jesus. Rome did it to try and keep some peace in the land. That's how Rome wanted things. They would just exercise their authority whenever they needed to just kind of say, look, we're in charge. So there are these Roman soldiers at the tomb because Rome doesn't want some of the followers of Jesus coming and taking the body and saying, oh, look, there was a resurrection. Oh, look, they're going to prevent that. They're really going to end all of this Jesus stuff. And that's where we're at when we get to Matthew chapter 28. And here's what I want to invite you to do. I don't know, why you're here today or how you got here. Maybe you're here because this is kind of what you do on Easter. Maybe you're here because Jesus is a normal part of your life. Maybe you're here because a friend invited you. Maybe you're here today because coming to church is how you make sure grandma will give you some ham at lunch, right? I don't know all the layers of what caused you to be here today.
And so maybe the story of Easter is really new to you, maybe it's really old to you, but as we read some of the story of the resurrection, I want to invite you to do something different. I want to invite you to allow yourself to have just a little holy imagination today. And I want to invite you to be a real close, bystander to these resurrection events. Or maybe you'll actually put yourself in as one of the people we read about, but let yourself feel some of the Middle Eastern heat and dry, arid heat of a day. Let yourself feel some of the dry, rugged terrain. Let yourself feel some of the early morning sun rising. Let yourself feel some of the tension of the day. There's political unrest. The Romans are trying to squash this little Jewish thing. The Jewish religious leaders are upset and feeling like maybe they got their position back. So there's all sorts of inner turmoil. There's people grieving the death of Jesus. There's people celebrating the death of Jesus. There's thousands of people there for all of these festivals that would have been taking place in the day. I mean, could you let yourself get into this story and literally feel it externally and with your flesh and internally with your mind and with your emotions? Let's be in it for just a couple of minutes. Matthew chapter 28, this is what we read. Again, there's been a death, there's been a burial. It says this after the Sabbath, so there's been a Saturday, that would have been the Jewish Sabbath, but after the Sabbath, at dawn, can you just feel the sunrise? It's hot, it's dry, maybe there's a breeze, and if there's a breeze, that's warm. At dawn on the first day of the week, which for them was Sunday, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, they go to look at the tomb. These two Marys are people who have had their lives radically altered by Jesus. For them, there is a life before Jesus, there is a Jesus, and then there is a radical difference. Life after Jesus. You kind of heard it in Lauren's story, right? There is a life, there is a Jesus encounter, there is a life with Jesus. And for these Marys, their life is so very different. And so they're going to the tomb, and what's hard for us to remember, because we're a couple thousand years later, we know they're going to go to the tomb, and there's going to be, there's this resurrection, but they're going to the tomb as people of great grief. There's been huge loss. There's all sorts of confusion, like, what about Jesus? And I thought this, and he said, but did they? And his followers, his closest followers, some of these guys, they abandoned him. What do we do to make sense of this? But they're still going to go to the tomb because they're still really mourning. I mean, when somebody close to you is lost, you don't get over it in 36 hours, right? The grief is still deep. And so as they're going to the tomb, you can feel some of that with them. Maybe you would walk alongside them. Maybe you would let yourself become one of them just for the moment, and you would feel that. It says this, things start getting really fun in verse 2. When they get there, there's a violent earthquake. Feel that ground shaking, feel noise, feel rocks moving. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. I know we have sometimes a little bit of a discomfort around the idea that God might on occasion taunt or mock. This is that moment. This is God taunting death. This is God mocking death. This is God with the big finger wag. No, right? This is that moment, right? There's an angel and there's these ladies and they don't know what to do with this in this moment, right? Can you, again, be a bystander, feel the moment, feel your own shock, your own wonder, maybe your own initial impulse to run the other way. Or stand there and that just for a second, his appearance, or this angel's appearance, was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. These guards, these Roman guards, fully equipped, big and strong, were so afraid of him that they shook and passed out. You feel it a little bit? These guys who hadn't been afraid of anything in a really long time. Can you see them landing? Can you see the dust coming up from the ground where they've landed? Because they were so afraid. It's like, what a moment. I mean, these ladies have got to be thinking, what is going on? That was kind of cool, but what is going on? What are we standing in the middle of here? And then the angel starts this conversation. He says to the women, don't be afraid, for I know that you're looking for Jesus, who really was crucified. You really did see a dead man. He really was dead. Romans don't mess up crucifixions. He really was dead. You're not wrong for looking for the crucified. He really was crucified. But he's not here. He's risen. Just as he said and tried to tell you, come and see the place where he's laying. Now feel yourself just kind of creep towards the tomb a little more with them and maybe peek in. Then he says, then now go quickly. And I want you to tell the other disciples, all the people who betrayed him when he needed them most, I want you to tell them these 6 words that change everything. He has risen from the dead. Game changer. You're looking for somebody who was crucified, really was dead. Oh, by the way, he has risen from the dead. They don't know what to do with that yet. They don't know what to make of that yet. Feel the initial confusion. Feel the initial, like, wait a minute, what are we supposed to, how did that, right? You feel that with them a little bit? There's an angel, there's passed out soldiers, there's an empty tomb. There's this word that he's risen. So go tell the disciples this and tell them that he's going ahead of you into Galilee, and there you will see them. And now I've told you. So the women, they do what you would expect they would do, right? They hurry away, like there's a mini sprint going on here, right? They hurry away from the tomb, and I love this, afraid and yet filled with joy. You ever been freaked out and excited at the same time? That's them in this moment. Scared to death and so excited they don't know what to do with themselves. Scared so much that they probably can't scream and so excited they can't get any words to anything. And they're on the run, like run with them for a second. Run alongside them and feel what they're feeling and experiencing in the moment. And they ran to tell his disciples. And then suddenly, Jesus met them. Greetings. Probably today, if it happens a couple thousand years later, it's a little bit of, hey. Hey. What are you going to do? Dead guy, empty tomb, dead guy standing in front of you. Hey. What are you going to feel? What are you going to think? What are you going to do? Right? I feel like that's life-changing. Somehow, that's a story you're going to tell some people about. Like, hey. And I don't know. I feel like they probably have questions. I feel like they probably wonder, tomb, cross, thing, wait, what? But in the moment, the questions kind of take a back seat. In fact, it's kind of interesting how fast the questions take a back seat. Suddenly, Jesus sees him. He says, greetings, he said. And they came to him, and they just fell at his feet and worshiped him. The crucified's now living in front of us. I guess my questions probably don't matter a ton. The awe and the wonder somehow trumps the inquiry. And they just fall down and worship him. They just grab his feet and worship him. I'm not sure what else you do when you see the dead walking again. Right? They just worship him. And Jesus reassures them again. He says, don't be afraid. Go and tell my brothers. Go to Galilee. I'm going to see them there. I'm going to see all of you there. So there's the story of this resurrection, right? It's the event. Literal resurrection, literal Jesus, literal dead guy, literal living guy. And maybe the question on some level is like, what's the point? What's the point? It's a resurrection. It's a cool story. It's miraculous. It's supernatural. What's the point? Now, some of you, maybe we would say, well, the point is, right, that I could be forgiven. I'm not 100% sure what to make about this sin thing, but I could be forgiven. 100% true. 100% true. But probably not the point. It's probably not actually the point. And, oh, well, then the point is, right, then the point would be that I could go to heaven. We could go to heaven. That's the point, right? Death, resurrection, I could have life. I could go to heaven. 100% true. And yet still, I don't really think it's the point. I don't think it's the point. I don't think. You'd be like, well, then I could have like this clean slate, this fresh start. I get to be this new person. I get to launch out. True, 100% true. 100% true. Still not the point. It's not the point. Forgiveness, not the point. Heaven, not the point. Fresh start, not the point. Now, before some of you think like I've become a heretic and have lost my mind, just give us a minute, okay? Give us a minute. What if all of those things are great points, part of the point, but what if they're really just part of the bigger story? What if they're actually part of something a little bit bigger that's happening? What if those two easily become just little placeholders? What if those two easily become things that we get lost in and we spiritually even abuse sometimes? And what if those become things that allow us to set up religious systems and start trying to measure and scale goodness because, well, I got this forgiveness and I probably want to try and keep that somehow and I'm trying to get this heaven thing. What if these really good things become misplaced tools because what if there's a bigger point? So to really understand the point, we got to go backwards just a little bit. So there's this resurrection, right? We're celebrating today. But let's go backwards into this crucifixion a little bit. So if you've got a Bible or you still got your phone or whatever, let's just go back one chapter, Matthew chapter 27. Matthew chapter 27. And let's pick up a little bit of this crucifixion account. What's happening in and around. Okay, so Jesus, again, on a cross, beaten, bloodied, battered, speared, nailed, all of the agonizing that you can think of, shamed, embarrassed, publicly humiliated, all of those. And let's start reading what happens in Matthew chapter 27. We'll start reading in verse 45. And again, I just invite you to feel it. Like, let yourself be at this cross. Let yourself be somebody actually in the story. That's what we read. From Jesus on the cross, middle of the day, from noon until 3 p.m, darkness came over all the land. Okay, so just feel that for a second. The brightness of the day, the sun of the day, suddenly gone. Not a rain cloud moved in, not it became overcast, not even a storm cloud came in. It became like night in the middle of the day. What do you think when you're standing there and it goes from clear and sunny to the middle of the night in a blink? What do you think when you thought you had most of your day left and suddenly you can't see very much in front of you anymore? You definitely can't see to the horizon. What do you think when there's not a storm, but there is sudden, absolute darkness? Something's shifting. Do you get a little unnerved? Do you get a little scared? Do you have a little adrenaline rush that starts to wonder, what do I do? What's my response? Where do we go? Do we need to get to cover? What's really happening? Like, what begins to set in. Verse 46, about 3 p.m, towards the end of this period of darkness, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, and it's loud in volume, it's loud in anguish, it's loud in intensity, it's loud in pain, it's loud in grief, it's loud in ache. In every way that you can imagine, this is loud, and feel this, and he utters these words. And if you can learn to say these really well, you get more ham at grandma's this afternoon. Look, okay, bonus points for this kind of thing, right? And Jesus cries out, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, which just really means, my God, why have you forsaken me? There's this separation from God his Father in the moment. And here's what's happening in the moment. In the moment, Jesus is not merely taking your sin. Jesus in this moment is becoming your sin. He is literally becoming the act and the essence, the nature of all of your sin and my sin. All of the things and all the ways in which we would live as if God would hold out on us, or God is removed, or God just kind of created and let us be, or God is irrelevant, or that God wouldn't want us or couldn't use us, or that we could do it better, or that our version of the dream is better. All the ways in which we live with more allegiance to the culture than we do God. All of that sin. All the decisions and choices we've made, all those attitudes that we've displayed, all those words we've conveyed that are more about our way or a different way than God's way, all of those things, from what feel like the biggest to the smallest, Jesus in this moment, he is literally becoming those. And for those of us well acquainted with our sin, we feel the weight of that moment. We feel the weight of Jesus becoming the things that many times we wish we wouldn't have done. We feel the weight of Jesus becoming the rebellion or the addiction we no longer want, or the carelessness, or the words we wish we could pull back, or he's becoming that. It's a huge moment. He's not just paying a price. He's not just balancing a scale. He's becoming that. When some of those that were standing around, and you could hear this conversation, just listen in the darkness, right? When some of those standing around heard him, they said, oh, look, he's calling Elijah, who was a prophet centuries ago that God empowered just to help the nation of Israel try and see how God was relating to them and trying to lead them. Immediately, one of them ran and got a sponge, and he filled it with wine vinegar. He put it on a staff, and he offered it to Jesus to drink, but the rest said, no, man, just leave him alone. Let's actually see if this old prophet Elijah would come and save him. There's still this mockery, this poking they're doing with Jesus. And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud, anguish-filled, longing, broken voice, he gave up his spirit. He became sin, became your sin, became my sin, and then under the weight of it, he experiences death. It's complete death. He gives up his spirit. He is dead. No more inhaling, no more exhaling, no more heartbeat. It's over. It's over. And then there's this line that Matthew writes. It starts with these three words, at that moment. And at that moment, if we could get into what Matthew's trying to really write, if we go back to some original language or whatever, what Matthew's trying to do is use a word like suddenly or shockingly. Like he's trying to write, man, nobody saw this coming. He's trying to write, like, look, like this happened, and Jesus became sin, and Jesus dies, and there's this death, but then you will not believe what happens next. It is really like this flag-waving moment of Matthew trying to, as loudly and as clearly as we can, say, this is unbelievably shocking. And what's so shocking, he says, is the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And that's wonderfully confusing, so let's leave it there and go home and have ham. It's been a good day, yes? The Jewish people, they would have lived their life around a temple. They went to a temple to worship God. And when they would get into the temple, there would be all these different ways they could worship God, tools they could use, expressions in which they could worship God. And at the front of the temple, there was this place called the Holy of Holies. It's really kind of, there was this ark and the Ark of the Covenant in there, and that's really for them on the earth where God's presence dwelt. That's where he was. But there was a barrier between them and this Holy of Holies. There was this large curtain, or some of you might be reading from a Bible that calls it a veil. It was just huge. It was this huge curtain that went all the way across the front of this temple, and all of the people could worship out here, but on the other side of the curtain, that's where the presence of God was, and it was a barrier. And once a year, a priest would be chosen to go into that Holy of Holies to make a sacrifice on behalf of the whole nation. And that was risky business. Going into the Holy of Holies, that was risky. They would actually tie a rope around that priest's foot in case he didn't come out long enough that something had gone bad, they could pull him out, right? They didn't want dead people living in the hole. They'd pull him out, right? Well, here's the thing. Like, God designed the temple. He told the nation how to build it. He gave the architectural plans. He gave all of the details, right? What should be in it, all the decor. And one of the things that he said was, you got to put up this barrier. And that's really all that the veil is. It's like, let's just use a door for today. Like, it's this barrier. It's like, here, you can have all of this, but my presence is on the other side of this. There's a barrier between where you are and where I am. And what you got to understand, when you think about this curtain or this veil, what you got to understand is that though God designed the temple, he didn't design this with any joy. He didn't design it with any great delight. He designed the curtain, in fact, he designed with incredible grief and agony. It was never God's design to have separation. The curtain actually represents our sin. It's there because our sin. We actually put it there. We actually put it there. I was like, because of how you've lived without me and lived like I was holding out on you and lived like you thought what was best, there's this barrier in our relationship. And it's this curtain. And so the Jewish people, they've lived their whole lives with this barrier. And so you can imagine the shock and the wonder when Matthew writes, when Jesus died, that curtain was torn in two, completely removed, torn from top to bottom. It's God tearing it. It's Jesus tearing that in his death. It's like he became all of the sin that's separated, so he has completely removed this and opened up this way. He's like, oh man, look, the reason I've sent Jesus is for this. It's to get this veil, to get this barrier, to get this curtain out of the way. And in one moment, what had not been available is suddenly available. In one moment, what every single person has is access. In one moment, everybody has access. Everybody. Nobody is without it all of a sudden. Like, it's God saying, look, this is here, and everybody's had a barrier, everybody's had an obstacle, and they're used to that. And look, nobody's anticipating this. That's why Matthew's like, you're not going to believe this. You are not going to believe this. This veil's torn. This door it's wide open. Everybody has access now. But access to what? Here's the thing, like this barrier is removed, and you kind of picture it like the presence of God not just being in this one place anymore, but it's filling the earth, and it's looking for new places to live, which is you and me. Like looking for new temples, new houses, and that's you and me. He's looking. So now everybody has access to his presence. Everybody has access to the one thing that was kind of partially removed. There is access, but now there's access to his presence. There's opportunity. There's opportunity. And see, we want presence because, look, when we get in the presence of someone or something, what we know is that inside of presence, there's always the experience of like proximity, there's witness, and power. Whatever power that person or thing has, whatever ability, whatever reach, whatever influence that's in their presence. It's what becomes available. God's like, look, I'm giving you access to my presence where there is my peace, where there is my strength, where there is my newness, where there is my forgiveness, but where there is me. Like where there is me. But we got to understand something. Access and presence, they're not the same. They work together, but they're not the same. Since I was a kid, like a really little kid, as early as I can remember, I have been a die-hard, absolute, I just love baseball. I just do. I still really love it. I was impassioned by it as a kid. And several years ago, probably a decade or so ago now, I got an opportunity to go to the Louisville Slugger Bat Factory in Lexington, Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky. And what's there is this place where Louisville Slugger is the primary bat maker, has been throughout history of baseball, and lots of famous people over time have used their bats and things. I got a chance, there's about 8 of us, we got a chance to sit down with the owner, who is the 4th generation owner of Louisville Slugger. We got a chance to sit down with him for part of a day, and he gave us kind of a behind-the-scenes tour of how the bats are made, and there's a museum there, and he let us walk through this museum, and then when we're kind of done, we're wrapping up our time, he says, hey, I want to give you guys access to something. He says, you passed this on the tour, but I want to give you access to what we call the Bat Vault. And I got a picture of the Bat Vault for you, and we had seen this on the tour, and there's all these windows, right? And you look in, and inside the Bat Vault, there are bats that have been used by really famous baseball people like Babe Ruth, for instance, okay? Like the most famous players of all time. There's bats in here that have been used. Now, it's called the vault because people on the normal tour don't get to go in. They get to look through the window. And that's what we had done before. We had just looked through the window. And you're like, oh, maybe it was that person. Oh, maybe that person used that bat. And you're trying to squint and see through. And it's kind of cool. But he says, I want to give you guys access to this for a while. And so he takes us down and he unlocks the door to the vault. And he opens the door. Like, here, just guys, you guys can just, here, go have some access. And man, I stood there and I looked in and I peered in and I imagined and I could kind of feel myself holding a bat and looking and wondering whose it was. It was incredible. And then as soon as we left, I started calling my friends who were also baseball fans. I'm like, you're never going to believe this. And I told them where I was and I told them what I got access to. And they're like, oh man, what was it like in there? What was it like in there? I'm like, well, I didn't go in. I just had access. I didn't go in. I stood outside and I just looked. Right? I mean, of course not. Of course that's not what happened. Right? Of course not. That guy opened that door and said, you got access, and man, I was in there as fat, like I'm knocking friends over. I'm claiming to be the biggest, right? I'm in this thing, right? And we're in, and we're taking baths, and we're being so careful. We're taking baths off, but you could almost just feel the power of history, and we're in it. We've got all this close proximity, and it's all these things in our reach, and it's this incredible moment. It's an incredible moment. And he gave access, which was great, but access opened the door to like actual presence, being somewhere. They're not the same. They work together a little bit, but Jesus, like, he tears this curtain, he removes this barrier to give access for the hope of presence. I've thought about this a lot lately. I don't know what's happening, but everywhere I turn, there is a woman having a baby. Everybody in our life seems to be having a baby. I don't know what to say other than you all know how that happens. So, like, if that's great, charge on, right? Everywhere. And it's just taken me back a lot to like when our girls were born 18 and a half years ago and our twin daughters were born and we're in the hospital and they're getting ready to wheel Erica down the hallway to the operating room. Well, she'll give birth to the twins. And I have complete access, right? I'm their dad, I'm her husband. I have complete access. And I can't imagine for a millisecond stopping at the door and not going. I can't imagine for a millisecond not taking advantage of the presence. Jesus is like, man, let me get this. I have removed the barrier. Matthew is shouting it because it's so mind-blowing. And friends, listen, I think it's still a little mind-twisting for us 2,000 years later. Because here's the deal. Access is given, but presence is chosen. Access is absolutely given, but presence, that's chosen. It's chosen. And some of us, we see the access, but we're still kind of trying to earn our way. We're still trying to balance the scale. We're still trying to adapt to some type of religion or code that we've been handed or has been imposed, or we're still reacting to some religious thing, and like we're swinging the pendulum and saying, okay, I'm not going to earn anything. And then we tip the scale over here to the risk of actually missing some because we're so resistant to the other, right? It's like, oh, I'm never going to be told what to do about anything, right? And then we actually start missing Jesus. Like it's this. But the bottom line is that Jesus made it like this gift. He's like, here, I'm going to give you access. Just choose it. Like, he's like, hey, look, I removed all the barrier. Jesus came all the way, like, to the threshold of your life. Jesus came all the way to the threshold of your life. He's like, there has never been a greater display of how much you are wanted. There's never been a greater display of how much you are wanted, treasured, chosen, somebody that excited about you and being with you. That Jesus removes the greatest barrier that only he could move. He gets all the way to the threshold of your life and says, look, I'm giving you access. But you gotta choose. I'm not going to make you. I'm not going to force you. I've done everything so that you can just say yes to my presence. All you got to do is take one step. Just say yes to that forgiveness and to his leadership, to the relationship, not to the religion, not to the code, not to the formula, but to the person, the real crucified person, the real resurrected person. And some of us were standing over here. We're standing over here today. Listen, some of us were standing over here, and we're still trying to figure it out. We're still trying to figure out, have I done enough good? Okay, have I done enough? Do I have enough wealth of goodness? It's never going to be enough. And you're never going to be able to answer that question. In fact, Jesus actually said, like, there is never going to be enough wealth. Monetary wealth, wealth of goodness, wealth of duty, the wealth of good deeds. There's never going to be enough of that to save somebody. It's like, but I can do that. Some of you are standing over here and you're pretty convinced that it's your addiction's the final barrier, the thing that's holding you back. It's that addiction. Hey, look, listen. Jesus came all the way to the threshold, knowing about your alcohol addiction, knowing about your addiction to porn, knowing about your addiction to money or security. He knows all that. He still came. He's still like, I'm giving you access. I have become all those things so I could get this barrier out of the way. I want you. Access is given. presence, like, it's a choice.